Have you ever been through something so difficult that you felt like giving up? Well, today's story is about two guys named Paul and Silas, who fit that description perfectly. They were beaten and thrown into prison for just sharing their faith in Jesus. Can you imagine how discouraged they must have felt? But guess what they did next? Instead of complaining or feeling sorry for themselves, they started singing praises to God. And you won't believe what happened next, so let's dive in. Paul and Silas were traveling together, spreading the good news about Jesus. One day they reached a city called It was a bustling place with lots of people from different cultures and backgrounds. That made it a perfect place to share the gospel. But little did they know, it would also be the place where they would face one of their greatest challenges. As they were going through the city, they saw a group of women gathered around, and they decided to join them. There was something about these women that stood out to Paul. They seemed genuinely interested in what he had to say. Maybe it was because they were tired of the empty promises and toxic teachings that other religious leaders had fed them. Whatever the reason, these women were all ears as Paul shared the good news about Jesus. But this scene didn't last for long. Suddenly, a group of angry men burst into the scene. These men were part of a secret society, kind of like a gang, and they accused Paul and the other apostles of teaching things that went against the Roman Empire and their own beliefs. The situation quickly escalated. The crowd started to get rowdy, and before Paul knew it, he and his companions were surrounded by a mob of angry people. The leader of the gang was a silver merchant. You see, one of the women who had become a follower of Jesus was his daughter, but now she was nowhere to be seen. And when Paul mentioned her during the commotion, the man jumped to the conclusion that Paul had done something to her. In his rage, he dragged Paul and Silas to the local authorities and accused them of causing trouble and stirring up riots. The Roman rulers of Philippi were very strict, and they took the side of the angry mob. Without even bothering to listen to Paul's explanation, they ordered them to be stripped, beaten with rods, and thrown into prison. The guards locked them up in the innermost cell, the place where criminals and dangerous people were kept, and as if that wasn't bad enough, they were told to stay there until their trial. Imagine being in their shoes. You've been brutally beaten, and now you're thrown into a dark, dank prison cell. What would you do in that situation? Maybe curl up in a corner and wait for the inevitable. Or maybe lash out at the guards, blaming them for your misery. Maybe cry out to God, begging for help. But that's not what Paul and Silas did. In the middle of the night, while everyone was asleep, except for Paul and Silas, they began to pray. Their prayers took the form of songs of praise to God, and you won't believe what happened next. As their beautiful singing filled the prison, suddenly the ground began to shake. A massive earthquake rattled the foundations of the prison, opening up the doors and loosening the chains of every prisoner. This must have been terrifying for the guards. Imagine being a guard and suddenly the doors open and all the prisoners are freed. You might think it was the end of the world. But here's the amazing part. The jailer woke up, saw what had happened, and thought he had better kill himself. Why? Because in those days, if a guard wasn't able to stop a prisoner from escaping, they were often put to death. But then he heard something. It was Paul and Silas still singing praises to God. He ran to them and fell at their feet, asking them, "What do I need to do to be saved?" You see, in that moment, he realized that he needed God's forgiveness more than anything else. Paul and Silas gladly shared the good news about Jesus with him and his whole family. And as they accepted Jesus, they were immediately forgiven. Then Paul and Silas, the two prisoners, were taken out of their cell. You might be wondering why they didn't run away. Well, they didn't need to. The earthquake had brought an end to their trial. People looked at them in amazement and said, "Aren't these the prisoners who were kept in the innermost cell, the place where dangerous criminals were held?" And they couldn't help but wonder, how could such dangerous people escape without anyone noticing? Paul and Silas simply replied, "We were delivered from the clutches of evil powers and the darkness of this world." And with that, Paul and Silas left the prison and continued their journey. They walked away from Philippi, leaving behind a jailer, his wife, his children, and all the people in the city who had come to know Jesus. So remember, no matter how dark things may seem, God is always with you. He is mighty enough to open any door that is closed to you. Just like Paul and Silas, keep praising God even in the darkest moments, because He is able to turn things around and bring you out of any difficult situation.